Hello.
Good morning.
We don't know how many more times we get to do it.
Sleeping in.
This may be it. This may be it.
How are you?
Before we get you. Can we ask you just about some of the current events? Obviously, what's going on in Kenosha. The White House has put a lot of focus on criminal justice reform. What sort of criminal justice should be meted out for those who shot Jacob Blake?
Well, I know that the DOJ has launched a civil rights investigation and that the individual shooter, the alleged shooter, has been charged. But don't conflate criminal justice reform with criminal justice in this case, because criminal justice reform means, Pete, successfully, and you've seen examples of it just this week, that this president has stepped up and stepped in where others refuse to help people who have been languishing in prison long after they've paid their debt to society. And that's been really a hallmark accomplishment for this president, and you'll hear from Alice Stewart tonight, I believe, and you hear from other people again and again. But we should all be very concerned about everything we see in Kenosha right now. And it's too bad that the governor yesterday put his pride and his politics ahead of the public safety needs of Kenosha.
So just to make sure I ask it more clearly, perhaps, like last night from the vice president, we heard him talk about what's happening in Kenosha and in other cities and said, we will restore law and order, but didn't make any mention of Jacob Blake, the man who was shot and is now paralyzed. Why not?
But it's this president and vice president's administration that's already launched a civil rights investigation into the shooting. That's pretty quick action and decisive action.
Publicly,
Well, you guys always do this game though. It's why didn't he tweet about this? Why didn't so and so say that? I can talk about incomplete coverage all day long, and perhaps one day will when I'm out of here.
But we all get to deliver the speeches.
Right, but I think the most important thing to be said about Jacob Blake is I hope that he recovers, or that he survives and recovers, and I understand just through public reports what his condition is. But I was really struck yesterday by his mother's words. I mean, she went very forcefully at people who are, quote, using her son or anybody's child in the name of, quote, peaceful protest. Or she said, we don't know them. And she, like the family of George Floyd and the family of Rayshard Brooks and others, Pete, have said, please don't be violent. And nobody is listening to those families, it seems. So I think it's very unfortunate that we have what's happened in some of these cities and continues to happen in some of these suburbs. But it's not just law and order, it's really public safety. It's really about more generously resourcing and more deeply respecting those whose job it is to keep us all safe, who run toward the gunfire, who run into the burning buildings when we're told to run out of them and away from them. And I pray for the Blake family.
Your reaction to the NBA protest? They're not playing games last night. A lot of other professional athletes across the spectrum chose not to play as well to send a message about racial injustice. What's your reaction as a counselor to the president?
I don't have a reaction as counselor to the president.
What do you have as a personal? You're not affected as the biggest moment in sports activism in our lifetimes.
Right. So I'm watching that, and I discuss it with my children, but I don't have a public comment about it here at the White House.
Has the president talked to the family? Is the president calling on his supporters in Kenosha, like people like Kyle Rittenhouse, to stop the violence?
The president wants everybody to stop the violence, and I know you're trying to conflate that individual with President Trump, and you really shouldn't do that. Just like CNN should have had a chyron last night that said mostly peaceful protest with fire in the background. So that's pretty offensive, Joe.
But what about vigilantes? Come on. I mean, what about people who are out in the streets, who are supporters of the president, supporters of the idea?
Why are you talking about who they may vote for this?
Well,
why are you trying to incite more trouble by saying that?
It's been documented that there are a number of groups that.
Should we talk about the lunatic who shot up Steve Scalise and a bunch of other members of Congress and staffers 3 years ago, this past June?
Or the guy who
went for hunting for.
Well,
you've talked about that plenty, but I don't ever hear you mentioning the other guy. Like, in other words, are we going to play this game where we look at who somebody supports or what color hat they wear to a rally and somehow make us all responsible? Because I can do that. I can talk about lots of people who have been guests on CNN, imbued with credibility and legitimacy.
Easy to say, hey, I don't want my supporters participating in violence.
He doesn't want anybody to participate in violence. That's why he is calling for law and order, respecting the police, saying we're not going to defund the police ever. His vice president made that very clear yesterday. The president will make that clear tonight, most likely. And we defend the police, we don't defund the police. And by the way, this president doesn't want anybody to be violent. So that's very consistent. But you've got governors who, just couldn't get enough of everything we did for them with coronavirus. But they've got this under control. Do they? Do they have this under control? Doesn't look like it's under control.
Is it fair to say that you're saying vigilantes shouldn't be out in the street, patrolling the streets with guns if they're not police officers?
I'm saying that this is what the chief law enforcement officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin said. And he said, people want me to deputize civilians with firearms, and I'm not going to do that. But it would be nice if the governor accepted federal help the way he has on so many other scores. Anybody have a different question?
Has the president talked to the family of Jacob Blake?
I'm not aware of that.
Has the president watched the video of Jacob Blake?
I don't know.
About the hurricane, obviously significant what took place last night, one of the biggest ones to happen in the last century.
Mm-hmm.
Does the president have any plans? Will he visit FEMA? Will he do anything to address this issue today?
I do know those answers, and I'll let the president show you what he's doing with respect to that. But obviously he's monitoring. I was with him last night as he was monitoring it, actually getting an update, and it still had not made landfall when I was with him until about midnight or so, maybe later. But now it's gone from Cat 4 to Cat 2, making landfall, but people should understand we are not out of danger yet. There could be downed power lines in the water. Until your local officials say all clear, it's not all clear. So listen to them. I know Administrator Pete Gaynor, who we've worked with hand in glove here on many natural disasters, but also on the coronavirus task force every day, the response every day. They have stockpiled and surged supplies. They're ready for this because it was already predicted to be a more aggressive than normal hurricane season. So he feels confident about the food and the water and the tarps and the other supplies that have been stockpiled. And they're also making very clear to people, please don't think that because it landed and it went from a 4 to a 2 that everybody's safe. And we'll continue. This is a very, very big deal. And we see just as a once-in-a-century pandemic, we've got a once-in-a-century hurricane, but it's good that we've got a leader who's willing to monitor that and respond to it.
When the coronavirus
forcefully.
task force was discussing the CDC's new guidelines that if you were around somebody who had COVID but you're not having symptoms, you don't necessarily need to get a test, Anthony Fauci was not present. Would it have made better sense for Anthony Fauci to have been there for that decision-making, given the credibility he has on this issue with Americans? And are you concerned that political decisions played a role in the decision?
I'm not concerned about politics whatsoever. This task force has the same doctors on it it has all along. Doctors Birx, Redfield, Hahn,
But the key one wasn't
Fauci.
there for that decision.
Well, he's key to you. I mean, I've got a great relationship with Dr. Fauci. I think he's a wonderful person. Right, but he was having a surgery. In other words, you're acting like we asked him not to come that day. So be honest with the viewers. Don't say, oh, he wasn't there, like we forgot to invite him to the party. He's part of the task force. We have been very involved. He's been involved in many of the major decisions. And obviously, Dr. Redfield is the head of the CDC, and he makes those calls on behalf of the CDC. Also, I've noticed that testing capacity is way up in this country and testing requests are down. And people are not going to get a test, not because they can't get a test, but because they're not going to get a test. That's for a number of reasons that have been discussed in the task force.
So why will people be tested here tonight if they're not showing symptoms, but Americans shouldn't be tested if they were around someone with COVID and they're not showing symptoms?
I didn't say Americans shouldn't be tested. We're saying they don't need to be tested.
No,
the new
CDC said
guidelines.
they shouldn't be. They don't want those tests to be used by those individuals.
But first of all, these people are coming within close proximity to the president, the vice president, the two most essential workers in this country for the next 5 years at least.
So only a small number will be tested tonight as opposed to everybody?
No, that's not true. Everybody will be tested tonight.
So everybody, but not everybody will be in close proximity to the president.
Everybody who will be here, you don't know who will be in close proximity to the president. You don't know if he goes out to the crowd. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what your point is, except it sounds like you guys are getting really nervous that what you thought 2 months ago was going to happen, a Biden victory is not. So I'll tell you, maybe not in your polls, but a week from now they'll be up in these swing states, and the other side won't adjust.
For clarity, that's not a fair statement.
Now we're doing 800,000 tests a day. We've done 70-some million, probably closer to 80 million. We'll be at 100 million soon enough. 800,000 tests a day is unprecedented in this globe. On this globe, nobody has that. So the complaints about testing, you've now shifted to, well, gee, other people want to get a test. People are getting tests if they want to get tests, but the fact is that we have testing capacity up and testing requests down. And that's for many reasons, including people's personal choice. They've decided, well, I thought I might need a test, but it sounds like I don't, or I'll wait to see if my employer requires me to get a test, or if I feel like I've got symptoms or my health care provider says I should get a test. But people aren't using it as some kind of status symbol. They know it's a health consideration.
Are you concerned about modeling good behavior? Because you're going to have 1,000 to 1,500 people at the White House. Are you worried at all that Americans are going to see that and say, yeah, we can all gather in these large
You mean
numbers.
the Americans that are gathering in large numbers after
But there are
being
a lot
told
of
not
Americans who
to?
are staying home.
I mean, we're not going to be in bikinis at the beach here on the boardwalks,
But there are
or
a lot of Americans who are staying
having
home who
these.
are worried about getting the virus.
They are,
So,
and there are a lot of Americans who have been traveling around this country. Dr. Birx has shown us all the data about people moving around. You see the car sales, the Winnebago rentals. I mean, people are moving around,
So in other words,
mostly
you're
by
not concerned
car.
about that.
I'm always concerned about it, Amish. Of course I'm
saying
concerned.
You're not concerned about